Bulldozers roared where my wife's wildflowers used to bloom, tearing through a century of heritage like it was nothing but weeds. I stood at the edge of the destruction, fists clenched, heart pounding, as a foreman casually told me I was trespassing on my own land. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a mistake, it was war, and they had no idea who they were messing with. They say a man's home is his castle, but in my case, it was a garden. A wild, untamed, blooming sanctuary called Willow Glen Reserve. 100 acres of whispering grasses, heirloom roses, native wildflowers in a riot of color, and trees older than any human memory. My wife used to say it was the kind of place where the earth still breathed freely. After she passed, I left the city, left the noise, the deadlines, and the sterile landscape architecture firm I'd spent 30 years building, and came here for peace, for healing, and maybe a little redemption. I thought I'd found it until she came. Her name was Melinda Crane, 62 years of tightly wound ambition in a pastel pantsuit, with a voice that could cut through concrete and a handshake that felt more like a corporate merger than a greeting. She called herself the president of the Rosegate Meadows HOA, a title she wielded like royalty. And unfortunately, Rosegate Meadows sat directly adjacent to my southern boundary, a glittery planned community with identikit homes, artificial turf, and a disturbing number of white picket fences. At first, I didn't think much of them. My land was separated by an old wrought iron fence crawling with honeysuckle and ivy, the kind of natural barrier that said, let us both enjoy our peace. For a while they did. But peace isn't profitable, and apparently it isn't pretty either, not to someone like Melinda. The trouble started with a letter. Dear Mr. Chambers, it began printed on thick Rosegate HOA letterhead. While we understand your property is not officially part of our HOA jurisdiction, we would appreciate your cooperation in removing the overgrown flower beds that border the shared sightline with our community. The current state of these plantings creates an impression of disorder and diminishes the aesthetic value of Rosegate Meadows. I read it twice, then laughed out loud. The overgrown flower beds she referred to were a protected habitat of Virginia bluebells and prairie coreopsis planted by my grandmother, maintained by my wife, and now by me. I sent a cordial reply explaining the legal boundary, the ecological significance of the area, and kindly suggesting they focus on their plastic flamingos and pressure-washed driveways. Her second letter wasn't so friendly. She accused me of willful non-compliance with regional beautification standards, cited imaginary code violations, and threatened to escalate to county officials. That was the moment I realized Melinda wasn't just annoying, she was dangerous. And unfortunately for me, she had time, money, and an HOA board full of yes men who treated her opinions like gospel. Next came the landscapers. I caught them trying to climb over the fence one Saturday morning, clippers in hand, looking bewildered, when my two golden retrievers came tearing through the field like furry missiles. They backed off, but Melinda showed up minutes later, standing in heels far too dainty for wild grass arms, folded, demanding I comply with community aesthetics. I told her politely but firmly to leave. Her eyes narrowed. We're trying to improve the neighborhood, she snapped. Your property is holding back the value of our homes. I stared at her, surrounded by the last remnants of natural Virginia, and said, this isn't a neighborhood, Miss Crane. This is my land. It doesn't exist to increase your property value. That was the beginning of a Cold War. Every week brought something new. Anonymous complaints filed with the zoning board. Passive-aggressive flyers dropped in my mailbox about the virtues of modern landscaping. She even tried to host a community cleanup day that just so happened to be scheduled along my fence line. I stood there for hours, arms crossed, watching her minions glare at my daisies like they were cockroaches. Then came the odd surveyors, men in vests, pacing the fence line, muttering, measuring. I confronted one. He mumbled something about runoff analysis for drainage improvement. My gut twisted. I emailed the county, double-checked my deeds. Everything was still in order, but I felt it in my bones something was coming. I didn't know how big it would be. Not yet. That fall I left for Europe. It was a long-planned botanical research exchange, a favor to a friend from my old life. I was hesitant, but my property manager, Jordan, a quiet local who'd worked for me since I moved in, assured me everything would be fine. Just trees and bees out here, he joked. I wish he'd been right. 2 months in, I got the email. Subject line urgent. Activity near North Meadow. Jordan's message was short. Hey, Elliot, you might want to take a look at this. Didn't want to worry you, but some heavy equipment's been moving in along the Rose Gate boundary. Sent up the drone attaching pics. My hands trembled as I clicked the first photo, then the second, and the third. Bulldozers, cement mixers, orange-vested workers dragging rebar across what used to be my wife's favorite patch of foxglove. The old stream bank she used to paint in watercolor had been torn up. A rough gravel road now bisected my lupine grove. I couldn't breathe. I booked the next flight home. When I arrived jet-lagged and furious, I drove straight from the airport. The air, once perfumed with wild mint and honeysuckle, reeked of diesel. I followed the gravel path up the ridge and stopped cold. The view looked like something from a dystopian novel. A giant billboard stood planted in what used to be my wildflower field. It read, "Coming soon. The Rose Gate Pavilion where shopping blooms." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. Ahead of me, the trees had been flattened, flower beds bulldozed. Foundations had already been poured. Concrete, steel, rebar, all of it on my land. Not near it, not beside it, on it. A foreman sauntered over clipboard in hand, asking if I was here for the HVAC specs. I told him no, I was the owner of the land. His smirk faded. He looked down at the clipboard. "That can't be right," he muttered. "We've got permits." "Then your permits are forged," I said coldly, "because unless the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia changed while I was gone, this land is still under the name Elliott Chambers." I stormed off and drove straight to the Rosegate Meadows HOA clubhouse. Plush carpet, scented candles, real estate pamphlets in neat rows. And there she was, Melinda Crane. She was seated behind a mahogany desk like a queen about to hold court, flipping through a binder as if she hadn't just committed the greatest act of trespass in the county's history. "Elliot," she said brightly. "Welcome back. Lovely time in Europe. I hope I didn't sit." I didn't smile. "What the hell have you done to my land?" She blinked as if surprised I wasn't thanking her. Then that condescending smile slid across her face like oil on glass. "Elliot, there seems to be a misunderstanding. According to our partners at Bloom Vista, the boundary line was ambiguous. The county was more than satisfied with the survey we submitted." "You submitted a forged survey," I snapped, "and the only thing ambiguous is your grasp on the concept of private property." Her smile faltered. "Just slightly. The Rose Gate Pavilion is a vital development. It will benefit everyone, yourself included. Your property value will skyrocket." I stared at her, at the fake roses in the vase behind her, at the print of some pre-planned community hung proudly on the wall. Then I leaned in. "This isn't about value. It's about what's right. And I don't care how much concrete you pour, how many permits you forge, or how many board members you bully into submission you're building on my flowers, on my wife's garden. And I will burn this entire pavilion to the ground legally if I have to." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't stop us now." I turned. "Watch me." That night I called Jordan. Then I called an old friend, someone who had once told me, "If you ever need to sue someone into oblivion, give me a ring." I hadn't spoken to him in years. But that night I dialed his number. "Conrad," I said when he answered, "you still believe in land and justice?" He laughed. "Tell me who we're burying." And just like that, the battle for Willow Glen Reserve began. And let me tell you, those flowers weren't the only thing about to bloom. Conrad Vale didn't ask for much, just strong, coffee-clear facts and a good fight worth his time. I gave him all three. When I pulled into his driveway that night, still running on rage and jet lag, I was greeted by the warm glow of his study windows and the unmistakable scent of cedar smoke. Inside the place was a time capsule of legal warfare books, stacked high like battlements, framed newspaper clippings of court victories on the wall, and a chessboard where the game was always mid-match. "They poured concrete over my wife's garden," Conrad, I said, "and they're calling it progress." He looked at me, eyes sharp behind old spectacles, then motioned for me to sit. "Then we let them keep building," he said after I'd told him everything. I blinked. "Excuse me, let them build. Let them pour millions into it. Let them bring in steel glass, HVAC systems, and media coverage. Because once we prove it's your land, they'll have built you a monument, and $1 billion one at that." That was the moment the war began. Quietly, strategically, ruthlessly. Conrad's first move wasn't legal, it was tactical. He sent a licensed drone operator over the site under the guise of environmental research. What we got back was damning massive deforestation, soil disruption, and clear evidence of construction deep inside my deeded property lines. The footage alone told half the story. The rest was buried in paperwork, which meant Conrad was in his element. He brought in a small, fiercely loyal team retired paralegals, a forensic surveyor, a real estate sleuth named Marie, and a tech-savvy intern with a gift for digging through public records faster than most search engines. Their first target permits. What surfaced was a cocktail of deception so potent it reeked. The zoning adjustment that allowed commercial development had been approved in a county meeting scheduled at 6:45 a.m. on a federal holiday. The meeting minutes were sparse, and the attendance list included names that belonged to deceased or long-retired officials. Then came the survey. The one Melinda claimed proved ambiguous boundaries. It was dated only 2 months before construction began and bore the signature of a surveyor who, when contacted, stated plainly, "I retired 5 years ago." That's not my signature. Forensic handwriting confirmed it. Forged. That alone could have stopped a normal project. But Melinda Crane was not normal. She was overreaching, power-drunk, and shrewd enough to create a buffer between herself and direct blame. That's where Rosegate Bloom Holdings LLC entered the picture, a shell company registered in Delaware, with 2 listed officers, both using P.O. boxes and burner emails. But Marie was relentless. Within 10 days, she traced the real financier behind the LLC, a national development firm known for pushing high-dollar projects in small-town jurisdictions where oversight was thin. And right in the middle of it, Melinda. Through a subpoena obtained via a preliminary filing, we gained access to an internal email chain from Bloom Vista. Melinda's name came up dozens of times. Local asset will ensure approval, one exec had written. HOA support guaranteed, Crane is aggressively on board. Another thread, even worse, legacy suite promised. Crane expects ceremonial roll post opening, wants a plaque, on my land, for the woman who desecrated my wife's garden. That was the night I stopped sleeping. We gathered more. An environmental report that overlooked the existence of a federally protected orchid species that grew by my stream. A public hearing about the mall that had been advertised in a classified section of a rural newspaper with a circulation of 300. A community support letter signed by over a dozen residents who turned out to be relatives of the HOA board, or in one case, a dog. Meanwhile, Melinda was living like a queen. Local papers, undoubtedly greased by Bloom Vista ad dollars, ran pieces hailing her as the mind behind the Meadows miracle. She posed for site photos in a hard hat, pointing dramatically at blueprints. My neighbor Ruth, the one who'd been feeding me quiet updates since this began, told me she'd even installed a custom chair in the HOA office embroidered with "Founder of the Pavilion." Then came the oil painting. I thought Ruth was joking when she mentioned it. "No, Elliot," she said over the phone. "It's real. She's in a long gown standing in a rose garden with the mall in the background like she's Marie Antoinette. I think she paid an artist from New York." "It's a fever dream," I muttered. "It's a power move," Ruth corrected. "But the tide is coming." Conrad agreed. We were building something too, a legal sledgehammer. We documented everything, every inch of construction, every altered survey, every internal email, and every public deception. We even had our own survey team go in under cover of night to mark the original property lines with EcoSafe dye. Just for us. For proof. But the turning point, the real nail in the coffin, came unexpectedly. Marie managed to get hold of HOA meeting minutes from 3 months prior. In it, Melinda referred to my land by name as the future economic engine of Rosegate. She even described a seamless integration strategy to ensure community acceptance post-groundbreaking. Translation: lie until it's too late. Conrad chuckled when he read it. "She's arrogant," he said. "She thinks if it's built, it becomes real. But the law doesn't work that way, and now we have her fingerprints all over it." "So what happens next?" I asked. He looked up from the file. "Now we wait. Let them decorate. Let them fill it with stores and investors and photographers. Then on opening day, we introduce them to their new landlord." The months dragged. Each morning I drive past the construction site. What was once a sanctuary had become a steel jungle. Parking garages rose from old magnolia groves. A glass atrium was installed where cardinals used to nest. And towering above it all, a banner that read, "The Rosegate Pavilion, where shopping blooms." Every time I saw it, I clenched the steering wheel so hard it left marks. I wasn't just angry, I was grieving. But grief can be a powerful forge. It burned away, doubt sharpened resolve. By fall, the mall was nearly complete. Lights twinkled in the storefronts. Landscaping crews brought in imported trees and plastic turf. And in the middle of it all, Melinda strutted like a crowned empress, oblivious to the legal tsunami gathering behind her. That winter, the invitations went out. Grand opening gala, ribbon cutting, press conference. Celebrate the future of Rosegate. I RSVP'd anonymously. So did Ruth. So did a dozen paralegals and a few undercover environmentalists. But the most important RSVP came from the one guest nobody expected: justice. As the final details were being installed, fountain signage, even a velvet rope for VIP access, Conrad stood in his study arms folded, watching the printer spit out the final document packet. "It's time," he said. She wanted a pavilion of flowers. Let's show her what happens when you build on someone else's garden. And with that, we set the final act into motion. Not with bulldozers, not with shouting, but with the quiet thunder of truth and paper. Lots of it. The morning of the Rosegate Pavilion's grand opening arrived like the final scene of a play written by arrogance and staged on stolen soil. Crisp winter air hung over the perfectly paved plaza, where flower-shaped fountains burbled beneath fresh LED signage, and corporate banners flapped confidently in the breeze. Camera crews set up their tripods. Ribbon-cutting scissors were laid out on a velvet pillow. Champagne chilled in silver buckets. Inside the main atrium, the press gathered, investors shook hands, and somewhere in a corner suite upstairs, Melinda Crane adjusted her custom-made green satin blazer, the same hue as the money she believed would immortalize her name. She hadn't seen it coming. That was the beauty of it. Conrad's strategy was never about flash. It was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. While she preened for cameras, while Bloom Vista finalized contracts and vendors prepared for crowds, a different kind of ceremony was taking place just outside the service entrance. A man in a navy suit handed a thick envelope to the mall's general manager. Another approached the pavilion's legal counsel, and then at precisely 8:58 a.m., a tall, gray-haired process server stepped directly in front of the media scrum and gently tapped Melinda on the shoulder. "Mrs. Crane," he said with practiced calm, "you've been served." Cameras captured the exact moment she accepted the envelope. First the confusion, then the disbelief, then the panic. Her hand trembled as she flipped the cover sheet and read the bolded header, "Affirmation of land ownership and motion for immediate injunctive relief." Somewhere behind the cameras, I stood silently with Conrad at my side, watching it all unfold. "She's wearing the painting," I muttered. The oil portrait she'd commissioned months ago, her triumphant self standing in a blooming rose garden, the pavilion behind her like Versailles, was now reflected in real life. Same suit, same smug expression, at least until it melted off her face like wax in the sun. Melinda stumbled back, clutching the documents as if they might burst into flames. The reporters, smelling scandal, turned their lenses to her. One shouted, "Ms. Crane, are the reports true? Is the pavilion built on stolen land?" Another asked, "Did the HOA misrepresent the zoning approvals?" Melinda tried to speak, but nothing coherent came out. Her assistant reached for the papers, but she jerked away suddenly, alone in a room full of people who'd all been sold a fantasy. Within the hour, chaos spread like spilled ink. Conrad's team had filed the case in circuit court at 9:00 a.m. Sharp, and within minutes, the judge, already briefed and anticipating the motion, signed an emergency injunction halting all operations on the property. Storefronts were locked before they could open. A PR rep from Bloom Vista tried to spin it as a small legal misunderstanding, but the court order was clear, enforceable, and final. No construction, no commerce, no access. Not until the matter of ownership was resolved, and by then, it already had been. The documentation was ironclad. Title deeds going back 130 years, surveyor maps, forensic signatures, expert witness affidavits, internal emails showing premeditated fraud. The pavilion wasn't just sitting on my land, it was embedded in it like a parasite rooted in the wildflowers it had destroyed. The mall was frozen in time, a billion-dollar tombstone built on arrogance. In the following weeks, legal warfare erupted behind closed doors. Bloom Vista's attorneys launched every Hail Mary they could. Motions to dismiss, claims of estoppel, pleas for renegotiation. But Conrad dismantled them all like a patient surgeon. Your clients were warned, he'd say calmly in court. They received letters. They ignored documented ownership. They chose to proceed. The court ruled in our favor, completely, unequivocally. The land belonged to me, every inch of it, and everything attached to it, every brick, pipe, pane of glass, belonged to whoever owned the soil beneath it. Me. For a moment, Bloom Vista considered dismantling it, literally tearing down the pavilion to avoid the optics of paying damages. But that fantasy lasted about 3 days. The cost of demolition alone, not to mention the environmental fines, would have bankrupted them. And so they came crawling to the table. The negotiation was swift, brutal, and entirely one-sided. I would accept ownership of the structure as part of a trespass settlement. In exchange, I'd clear Bloom Vista of future claims provided they paid every cent of my legal fees, a hefty damages sum, and surrendered all rights to the site. I agreed. With the ink barely dry, I sold the newly unified land and mall asset to a global real estate trust that specialized in high-value acquisitions. Final sale price, $1.8 billion. Just like that, the pavilion became theirs, legally, legitimately, and I walked away from the most egregious land grab in the history of our county, not as a victim, but as its most unexpected victor. And as for Melinda, the fallout was immediate. Her emails, her signatures, her private communications, every damning piece of evidence became part of the public record. The county board, eager to avoid being pulled into the scandal, threw her under the bus in record time. The HOA that once bowed at her feet dissolved under the weight of civil suits, angry homeowners, and debt it couldn't repay. Her portrait was quietly removed from the HOA clubhouse. Some say it was burned. Others say it was repainted with a clown nose. I never asked. But the final blow came not from me, but from the state attorney's office. They launched a formal investigation into permit fraud, zoning corruption, and document forgery. Melinda was indicted on multiple counts of conspiracy fraud and abuse of public trust. Her trial was short, her defense weak, her sentence 12 years. She wore that same green suit to court. It didn't help. When the gavel fell, I was in the gallery. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched her be led away, a woman who tried to bulldoze a legacy for the sake of her vanity, and failed. My life after the trial didn't become quieter, it became purposeful. I used a portion of the funds to create the Wild Bloom Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving native habitats and defending landowners from corporate or bureaucratic overreach. We've already helped 4 families win cases against similar HOA abuse. We're just getting started. The rest of the money went into restoring Willow Glen. What hadn't been paved over was now replanted with wildflower species my wife had cataloged in her journals. We rebuilt the stream bank, reintroduced pollinators, even brought in conservation students from the university to help catalog the return of native species. I live now in a coastal cottage in the Outer Banks. 2 rescue dogs, a small greenhouse, and a view of the sea. No HOA in sight. Sometimes I drive by the pavilion, now rebranded under new management. It's thriving. The stores are busy, the parking lot full. They've even preserved the rose-shaped fountain in the plaza, unwittingly, the last piece of Melinda's dream. But I never stop long. I have a garden to tend, a legacy to protect, and a promise to keep, one wildflower at a time. Sometimes the fight for justice doesn't come with sirens or shouting. It comes quietly, rooted like wildflowers, patient but unrelenting. Elliot Chambers' story reminds us that when someone tries to take what's rightfully yours, whether it's your land, your voice, or your legacy, you have every right to stand your ground. You don't need to scream. You don't need to match their power. You just need to stand on the truth and surround yourself with the right people who know how to wield it. The core lesson here is that documentation, patience, and integrity can be more powerful than bulldozers and billion-dollar deals. Elliot didn't win because he had deep pockets or political influence. He won because he knew what was his, and he had the courage to defend it. With every forged signature, every lie buried in bureaucratic filing, and every camera aimed at the wrong hero, the truth was quietly gathering strength behind the scenes. And when the moment came, it didn't just stop the fraud, it reversed it. Another powerful takeaway is about legacy and principle over profit. Elliot didn't just reclaim his land, He honored the memory of his wife, protected the flowers she once planted, and made sure no HOA or development scheme could ever erase the love and care tied to that soil. In doing so, he turned personal loss into public purpose, founding the Wild Bloom Foundation to help others in similar fights. That's the kind of justice that echoes beyond the courtroom. To anyone out there facing pressure from HOAs, corporations, or anyone trying to take what isn't theirs, don't fold. Know your rights. Keep your records. Ask for help if you need it. And remember, the law, when used wisely, is a powerful tool for those who refuse to be trampled. And now, from all of us at US Justice Story, thank you. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing in stories that matter. Stories like Elliot's are more than entertainment. They're reminders that dignity, courage, and quiet resolve can still win in the end. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own battle, drop a comment. We read everyone, and if you've faced your own HOA horror story, share it below. Because truth deserves to be heard, and here we'll always give it the mic. Stay strong, stay rooted, and never stop blooming, no matter who tries to pave over you.